negative personal consequences as the result of the decisions that Donald Trump is making. And so when Donald Trump's strength, the thing that people count on him the most for, there's two things. One, that he will handle immigration well, and two, that he will handle the economy well, although they're flipped. They want the economy first, immigration second. And right now, he is failing on both of those fronts, and you're seeing his numbers drop on both of those fronts. And when you go at his strengths, at the central things people elected him to do, and people feel like he's failing on those fronts, especially because he keeps deporting people wrongly, and he keeps crashing the stock market, and prices of things are going up. Inflation's not coming down. He made promises he couldn't keep. That is a recipe for Donald Trump to get into really negative territory really fast. We have never seen somebody in the first 100 days. I mean, presidents enjoy a honeymoon period. The bottom usually starts to fall out sometime in the summer. Donald Trump has managed to crater every advantage he had before the first 100 days are up.
We talk a lot as well about message delivery in the manosphere and the blogosphere and the podosphere and the spherosphere and all that stuff, message delivery. It feels like we're in a lived experience chapter of our politics. How much influence do influencers even have in the political arena right now, Sarah?
Well, they actually do have some. Look, I want to make an argument for offense right now. Look, Donald Trump wanted to make the case that the problems in the economy were Joe Biden's fault. And I think that, yes, people do not believe that.
Remember the early days of the Trump administration? It feels like a lifetime ago when the national conversation constantly circled around eliminating DEI initiatives and reviving some mythical idea of meritocracy. Looking back, it was absurd even then, especially considering people like Pete Hegseth, the infamous DUI hire, were handed positions of influence. And somehow, he's still around. But it wasn't just Pete. His inner circle was just as inept. The ironic part? Even they seemed to realize Pete was the least qualified among them. That's why so many have jumped ship. Case in point, his top aide just resigned today amid a fresh scandal, sending Pete into damage control. When reporters asked him about it, the self-proclaimed tough guy couldn't even stick around to answer. He just bolted. We'll break it all down. But before we do, if I could quickly ask you to leave a like on this video, and if you haven't already and you enjoy our channel, to hit that subscribe button. It goes a long way, and it really does mean a lot to me. Now, before we can get into what Pete was running from, before we can check that clip out, of course, we need the context of the story that he's so scared of. And part of it we get from Chris Hayes right here.
Now, the Defense Department is notoriously nonpartisan, avoids deviating from decorum, so an eruption of infighting is only making Hegseth's stain on the Pentagon worse. Quote, "There is a complete meltdown in the building, and this is really reflecting on the Secretary's leadership," said a person familiar with the matter. Pete Hegseth has surrounded himself with some people who don't have his interests at heart. Joining me now is one of the reporters of that story, Paul McCleary, who covers the Pentagon for Politico. I got to say, this is a very illuminating piece. Thank you for your and your colleagues' reporting. Let me just start by one of the ways that you framed this that was useful for me was there was some notion when a person who didn't have a traditional resume for this job was confirmed, he would be surrounded by people with a lot of institutional knowledge and a lot of experience at the top. And yet it seems he kind of brought in his people at the top, and that's been part of the problem.
Yeah, a few of the Dan Caldwell is one of his top advisors, and Darren Sloan. Like, I'd worked with Hegseth a little bit in the private sector when Hegseth was working with veterans organizations, right? So he knew them previous to this, and he brought him with him to the Pentagon. They both had some Pentagon experience, but not normally as much as people in those roles would have. They're both veterans, so they'd both been in the military. They both had served. And then Joe Casper, his chief of staff, worked on the Hill for a long time. He had, again, a little bit of Pentagon experience, but none of these guys were really in the building for years and years and years and built those relationships as these top advisors normally do, or else they're former senior officers many times and things like that. So it's a group that had come in who are not, newbies to Washington, but pretty new to the building and pretty new to this sort of organization. I mean, it's a massive global organization, right? With millions of people in uniform, about 800,000 civilian employees around the world, and it's a big job to manage all these fiefdoms, as well as being a diplomat when you go overseas. So This is a brand new thing, and especially it makes it difficult when people who hadn't really been there before, and Hegseth, who had never, he was in the army, he retired as a major from the Guard years ago, but he had never done anything even close to this size or scale.
All right, so like I said, unsurprising that Pete Hegseth brought in a bunch of buffoons to the Pentagon with him who had no experience, or at least not the necessary experience to do that job. And it's the reason why we've seen everything fall apart immediately. And we see that in two breaking stories that just recently came out. The first about a new signal revelation about Pete Hegseth, more signal scandals, and the resulting quitting that came from his chief of staff. And I want to check out both of those stories right here. Hegseth had an unsecure internet line set up in his office to connect to Signal. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth had an internet connection that bypassed the Pentagon security protocol set up in his office to use the Signal messaging app on a personal computer. The existence of the unsecured internet connection is the latest revelation about Hegseth's use of the unclassified app and raises the possibility that sensitive defense information could have been put at risk of potential hacking or surveillance. Known as a dirty internet line by the IT industry, it connects directly to the public internet where the user's information and the websites accessed do not have the same security filters or protocols that Pentagon secured connections maintain. Other Pentagon offices have used them, particularly if they need to monitor information or websites that would be otherwise blocked. The two people familiar with the line said Hegseth set it up in his office to use the Signal app, which has become a flashpoint following revelations that he posted sensitive details about a military airstrike in two chats that each had more than a dozen people. One of the chats included his wife and brother, while the other included Donald Trump's top national security officials. Asked about what Hegseth used of Signal in his office, which was first reported by the Washington Post, Chief Pentagon spokesperson Sean Parnell said the Defense Secretary's use of communication systems and channels is classified. And amidst all this turmoil for Hegseth, it keeps getting worse because his controversial chief of staff is now leaving the Pentagon. Pete Hegseth, controversial chief of staff, who played a central role in a power struggle that gripped the Pentagon, will exit the agency today. Joe Casper was originally expected to transition to another role within the Defense Department, but is now planning to go back to government relations in consulting, he said in an interview. A former longtime chief of staff to indicted Representative Duncan Hunter, Casper was a leading figure in the firings of senior advisors Dan Caldwell, Hegseth Deputy Chief of Staff Darren Snelnick, and Colin Carroll, the Chief of Staff, to Deputy Defense Secretary Stephen Feinberg. The trio were ousted last week in a leaked investigation. Some officials saw the wave of firings as a bid by Casper to consolidate power. Casper did not like that those guys had the secretary's ear. A person familiar with the dynamic said he did not like that they had walk-in and hanging out privileges in the office. He wanted them out. It was like a knife fight. So it's no surprise that it's a disaster at the Pentagon when we have possibly the dumbest person in our government running the department with the most government jobs. It doesn't seem like that's how we set up success. That doesn't seem like a meritocracy. And clearly, Pete Hegseth understands at least that tiny little bit of information, because when he was pressed on all these scandals, unlike the other day, Easter, when he decided to scream at reporters, Pete wasn't feeling so much.
See you again. How's life, sir? It's a real pleasure. Good to see you. Shall we?
Mr. Secretary, are you still using Signal for work purposes?
Secretary, get to work.
Just running on away. Pete can't handle the heat. I guess when you don't have, your kids to make incredibly uncomfortable behind you, you don't feel as strong and as tough and as mighty, do you now, Pete? Just, I don't want to deal with that. This guy's a joke. He's just embarrassing. It is crazy that we haven't heard a peep from Republicans about any of this. I don't want to get into the whole, her email shtick again, because it just feels like, how are we even comparing these two things? But really, her emails, like, this is all you people talked about. You claim to be China hawks. You claim to be security hawks. You claim to care about any of these things, and you never do. And it's playing out in the polling. People see the chaos, and they see that it impacts their lives. It's putting them in danger. And it's the reason why even MAGA, maybe not elected MAGA, but MAGA voters are turning on Trump. And Sarah Longwell of The Bulwark broke that all down. Some interesting reporting right here.
And when you listen to voters and focus groups, they say not only are things not getting better, but it feels like they're getting worse. And the level of uncertainty that they feel, and that is it. I really want to, it's the uncertainty that you can hear from people. You'll get some who are, they're still fans of Donald Trump, but they're kind of like, boy, I hope this works out. I'm not sure. But then you get other people, especially people who are cost constrained, who are at the lower end of the income spectrum. And those people notice every dollar and the way any price that goes up. And so from those voters who heard the promise that Trump was going to lower costs, who thought he was a businessman who knew what he was doing, and is now watching this chaos and not seeing their prices go down, they are starting to lose faith that he's going to be able to keep the promises that he made to them.
Sarah, you and I had a lot of conversations in the run-up to the November election day, talking about how, who could break through to people? Could generals make the argument? And they finally, in the closing days of the campaign, spoke out about who Trump was. They said he was, quote, fascist to the core. I think that no one would have ever been cynical enough to want people to experience any economic insecurity, instability, or rising prices, right? It's not a thought exercise, because too many people's lives and livelihoods and sense of their place in the world is at risk. But Donald Trump has done that experience for us. And I think if we go into the numbers, he's never had a 33% approval on any economic question. I don't think he even had that during the pandemic, when the disapproval was for supply chain issues, which people didn't completely blame him for. The world was shut down. The world streets were empty. And 38% is his overall approval on the economy. Has he ever been here before politically?
He's never been here before, but part of the reason he's never been here before is that, with the exception of COVID, where people recognized a major exogenous event occurring, Donald Trump's strength, his central mythology, was this idea that he was a businessman, and in that first term before COVID hit, he had a very strong economy and he kept running it hot. And so what you're seeing right now is people experiencing
things are really beginning to turn, and you can feel it. And I think the chaos and the incompetence is something that we have to very specifically highlight. Because, as I've said a lot lately, it's not just mean tweets, right? That's how Republicans like to polish up all of the chaos of Trump. Oh, the liberals, they get so mad about the mean tweets. It's not mean tweets. It is an incompetent defense secretary. It is a stupid trade war. It is calling to invade Canada, Greenland, the Panama Canal. These things destabilize the country. They destabilize the dollar. They destabilize the markets. They make it more difficult to pay your higher credit card interest, to get a loan for a house, for a car. That is what the destabilization of Donald Trump does. It makes your life worse. It's not, oh, we'll get a good economy, but maybe there'll be some chaos. It's, oh my gosh, that amount of chaos. And holy, this is the worst economy in history. That's what you get. And we got to call that out. We're doing so every single day on the show. And if you want to support that, as always, you can hit that subscribe button, leave a like on this video, and if you stuck around to the end, you can drop a blue heart in the comments. And until next time, I'll see you soon.